So we would like to welcome all of you to this panel discussion entitled ASEAN Digital Landscape, and I have a distinguished group of panelists to join me to talk about the state of telecommunications in ASEAN. And first of all, we would like to call on no less than the Chief Technology Officer of StarHub, Mok Pak Lump. Can I hear a big an applause for our guest from StarHub? She's a famous entrepreneur here in Myanmar and co-founder of MySquare. Let us all please welcome Rita Nguyen. And we have the Chief Executive Officer of the Myanmar Information Technology, Tun Turatet. And from the Thailand-Hong Kong Business Council, Barbara Maynard. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for this breakout session. And I would like to start off this discussion with what is really basically the state of the digital landscape in ASEAN. And I would like to throw that question first and foremost to Barbara. Barbara.
Thank you, Rico. Yes, Mingalaba, everyone.
Mingalaba.
Mingalaba. I'm very happy to answer that question. Because for two reasons. One, because e-government is a very good proxy for the level of sophistication of the digital economy. And the data are easily available because I'm going to refer to the UN's index on the e-government services. And the second reason that I'm really keen to talk about this is because if any economy that has a high level of government services, in fact, would have already addressed many of the institutional issues and the constraint that would have stopped that society or economy from getting into the digital side of things, because it allows the government to engage with its citizens, it allows the government to better deliver services at a lower rate, at a cheaper rate, and more efficiently. And also it encourages, it in fact requires greater transparency. And this is not just that it reduces the level of corruption because everything is so transparent, but it also provides information that makes it possible for a more efficient allocation of resources. So I think this is a very good starting point, Rico, to review the ASEAN landscape. And the range of the index, of this UN index, is very wide. We start at one end with Singapore, which is number 3 in the world. And then you go to the other end, which is Myanmar, which is number 175 in the world.
Opposite sides of the spectrum.
Indeed. But it's not the worst, because the worst is 193, I think, is Somalia, which, but between number 3 and 175 is a big gap. And then you have Myanmar, which is 52, so it's pretty sophisticated, Brunei a bit up, Thailand 102, and the other countries sort of cluster around the 100, 120. So I think this is the state of the ASEAN level of sophistication. As reference, let me give you the comparison with other Asian economies. Korea is number 1 in the world. Japan is number 6. China is number 70, which is a bit behind Malaysia, but pretty advanced. And India is number 112, which is about the clusters of most of the ASEAN economies. So that's the sort of the spectrum of the ASEAN landscape, of the digital landscape, Rico.
So, Mok, Barbara mentioned here the massive digital gap in ASEAN.
I wish I'm here as a telco in Myanmar. Really, because in Singapore, we are so saturated that there are 1.5 phones per citizen, 155% more penetration in a small country of 5.2 million people. More than 100% broadband penetration. Today, you can get a 1 gig in Singapore for about 39.90 Singapore, and almost every household has some kind of a pay TV services. Whereas here in Myanmar, I was having breakfast with the gentleman from Ooredoo, Myanmar, and he tells me that within the last few months, there are more than 3 million new SIM cards here in Myanmar. And at the tremendous potential for growth, I can just see that once the infrastructure is in place, whether it's Myanmar or some other countries, you see that the whole digital economy will grow. Today, being connected to the internet is leveling the playing field. Once you have the infrastructure in play, and everybody will be connecting and transacting through these devices, then the whole economy will grow. So I'm generally very optimistic and very pleased that Myanmar has opened the market. And with an 8-9% growth, I wish I was here.
You're just basically showing your one phone. I think you have more than two phones.
There are just too many devices, right?
Too many devices, indeed. Like me, I'm based in Singapore, and this is just one of my phones. So basically, Tun, we were just really talking about that Myanmar is really on the other side of the spectrum, Singapore being number 3, and Myanmar at 175. But, Mok mentions here that there is indeed tremendous potential to set up shop here in Myanmar.
Yeah.
And the growth potential can be really fabulous.
Which is why I came here. I get that question all the time of why did I come to Myanmar? And frankly, we're just never going to see this kind of growth and explosion and a digital revolution happen overnight in our generation again. There's just very few countries in the world that can happen.
How is the audio? Just a minute.
Sorry,
Rita.
can you not hear me?
Yeah? How's the audio? Can you hear us? Can you hear us? No, you can't.
Yes.
Can you hear us? Can you hear us back there? What about here? Okay.
Yes,
Where is the wireless mic?
It's my mic, okay? Yeah.
I don't know.
Can we get a wireless mic just in case for backup?
Yeah.
So everyone
Everyone
can be
can hear
heard?
me? Yes? Okay. So yes, so I get asked very often about why I'm here, and it is simply because this digital revolution doesn't happen overnight anywhere else in the world. We're just not going to see this again in our generation. But if we're looking at ASEAN in general, there's the Myanmar story, which is very obvious, where we're going to be looking at 30 to 40 million new SIM cards in the market over the next few years, and we're going from 0 to hero in almost overnight. But even if we look wider into ASEAN, which is really exciting as an entrepreneur, there are other revolutions that are happening. People are going from feature phone to smartphone. So it's not just about no phone to a phone, but also feature phone to smartphone. Indonesia is a great example of that. Vietnam is an astonishing example of that as well. So you've got this massive swell of a consumer class that's emerging. Plus, they're getting online, and online, levels the playing field. It's one of those situations where technology removes so many barriers to entry, and we're all the same, right? So, as an entrepreneur, it's an incredibly exciting place to be.
So Tun, let me ask you, because Barbara mentioned here that Myanmar was close to the end of the spectrum at 175. So, what initiatives are being undertaken by Myanmar to basically rise up the rankings?
Well, Myanmar has been in lower ranking for past 5 years. In 2010, we are 141. We dropped to 160 in 12, sorry. Then 14, we became 175. So we have been dropping. So there are about 16, 17 countries after us. So the thing is, we have been doing things for some e-government services, but people are doing much better than us. That's what happened. So if you look at Cambodia, they have a steady growth in ranking. Progress can be noticed. So recently, our Myanmar Computer Federation met the president And we had attention from the top leader to pay attention to e-government services. So when we talk about e-government, we are talking about services to the citizens, not how government officials use the iPad or computers. We're talking about how we're going to provide services to the citizens. In Singapore, for example, you have 2,000 over e-services. That's amazing. We don't have any here yet. Recently, we launched e-visa applications, but still, it's in an initial stage. So yeah, we have met the leaders here, and we had attention. I think what is important is the local contents, the service providers to create the applications while we are building the infrastructure connectivity. So that's what we are looking at. So recently, ADB has been working with us, and we have a company studying the e-government master plan, a company called Infosys from India. So we are working with them closely. So we have come up with the common applications we have to build, and also ministry-specific applications we have to look into.
But I think it's just beyond e-government services, right? I mean, today we are really living in the golden age of IT. Right. Because of all the whole ecosystem is in place. You have the App Store, you have the payment gateways, and so on. So once you enable the people with the right devices, people will come on board. Just like Vietnam, right? They come up with Flappy Bird. I'm sure there are companies in Myanmar that will come up with very, very innovative devices that connect people to people, businesses, and eventually, enough people will come up with new services for the government as well.
And there should be a lot of pressure right now on governments and the private sector to set up a more sophisticated digital landscape, because phones and devices are becoming cheaper on a daily basis. From $500, $300, you can now buy a smartphone for between $50 to $100, even $30. They're really becoming really cheap. So this is basically put with all of these smartphones, with these mobile phones in the hands of the consumers. Does it put more pressure now on governments to be able to move forward with their this digital strategy? Barbara?
Yes, I think Toon made an interesting point, that Myanmar has been slipping back, and that's not because it hasn't done anything, but because it has done less than the neighboring countries. And I think that's a very important point. So if I want to look at it positively, I can say that there is now a race to the top, and the stakes are getting higher and higher, because it's not just Myanmar that is racing, it's Laos and Cambodia and Thailand and the Philippines. They're all racing to the top as well. I think the Philippines has done extremely well in recent years. I think the three components of this particular index are quite instructive. The first component is the delivery of services itself, so that's the nature of the service. The second component is the infrastructure that enable the delivery of the service. And the third component is the development of human capital. And in a way, without the infrastructure and without the human capital, it can't happen. The development of the digital economy. So that's one point, and I think it's an important one. But the second point, and I've been listening, is that with the internet, we're talking about hyper-connectivity. It's not just within any contained locality or national boundary, but with the global community. And we also, when we talk about the digital economy, it's also in the context of the global digital economy. It's not that Cambodia or Myanmar, got it fixed inside, but then afterwards, how do you connect with the rest of the world? That's something that we should consider as well.
Yeah, I want to echo on that, because it's not only about connectivity to the country, it's about the fact that, is the country connected to the rest of the world? So today, based on the topology of where Myanmar is today, for example, I think today is only connected via India, CME-3, submarine cable systems, right? So today, I think within ASEAN itself, amongst all the ASEAN countries, I think, perhaps one of the initiatives the governments can do within ASEAN is how do we ensure connectivity amongst the ASEAN countries is improved. I give you an example. Today from Singapore, I can buy bandwidth from US, which is so far away, much cheaper than I can buy bandwidth from Indonesia. It's because of supply and demand situation. So perhaps one of the initiatives that governments can do is to see, can the governments amongst G2G facilitate entry levels, cable landing stations, so that private entrepreneurs can build submarine cable systems, land-based systems to connect the ASEAN countries together.
Mm-hmm. So how can you basically expedite the digital landscape here in Myanmar?
The first thing I would say would be infrastructure readiness, and there must be ecosystem for tech entrepreneurship, tech startups. The cost of doing business here is very high, even compared to Silicon Valley or developed countries. You know, financing, the rental, the access to internet, broadband, they are very expensive. I think the reader will agree with me. So these are the first thing we have to look at. And then, now if you want to set up a tech company, it will cost you a couple of $1,000s to set up, and it takes a few weeks. So if we can have a single window to help all these administrative costs, that would be the first thing we can do. Second thing, we have to enable the environment for failures. You know, in the US, Silicon Valley, they have an economy of tech startup failures, economy of scale. We don't have that. You know, if you fail your business, you're a loser. So we don't tolerate this kind of tech failures in entrepreneurship here by culture, the parents, the peer pressure. So we have to accept that for tech companies, startups, you know, there is a high rate of failures. And we should do that more. Then we'll learn from our lessons, mistakes, and we do better. Again, I want to re-emphasize that you have infrastructure, you have devices. But what if you don't have contents? You know, what are the farmers, the vegetable sellers, going to use these devices for social media, maybe Facebook, maybe Gmail. But we need more useful application, education, doing business, managing finances, etc. But that's what second thing we got to do.
Mm-hmm. So Rita, how have you been able to succeed in this difficult environment in Myanmar?
It's actually remarkably easier today than it was a couple of years ago when I got started. Just to add, one thing is also knowledge transfer. One of the things that the governments can help also with is building bridges, because while culturally we're very different within the region, there are common lessons that can be learned, especially on the entrepreneurial side, that should be shared. And I mean, you know, celebrating failures and stuff. I come from the Silicon Valley. It's something that has to happen. You have to survive it, and then you'll start to see more and more people do that. And I think over time that will happen. As far as how you did it, I mean, we did it by just stumbling a lot, right? I did it with a lot of experience behind me, with some really strong backing. That's not necessarily the same as the local entrepreneurs. It's a much, much more difficult story for them. Venture funding is a good example of that. Like people want to give them money, but how do they do that? And how do you provide equity to a local Myanmar entity, to a foreign company? Like these types of things are just completely unknown to almost every young tech entrepreneur in this country. And so things like that will need to be sorted out. We did it with just lots of mistakes, lots of failures, lots of backtracking. Today it is a little bit easier, it's a little bit clearer, but it's not something that I would recommend to anyone else.
When you fall, stand up again.
Founder institutes, I suppose. No. So we understand FI is here.
Yes.
So I saw the news, so that's great news.
Yeah.
So they will do knowledge transfer for tech entrepreneurship, startups, that'd be great.
Yeah, so things like that will help, for sure.
So Barbara, you have Myanmar 175, Singapore at number 3, with ASEAN countries growing at varying speeds, and you have the ASEAN Economic Community about to become a reality by the end of next year. So what are the major challenges that have to be undertaken?
Well, if we want to narrow the gap between, just saying Singapore and Myanmar, I think we have to understand, what are the issues are in creating the excluded. Because, the whole theme of this is like inclusive connectivity.
Right.
But that's fine. But what if the connectivity creates exclusion as well? And I think that's something that we need to address. What is causing it? I think in terms of the exclusion, there are probably 4 reasons for the connectivity to the digital world. But before that, let me go to the big picture. We have a population today of 7 billion. The people who are connected to the internet or connected digitally, the estimates vary between 2.7 billion to about 4 billion. Whichever figure you use means that half of the people are connected and half of the people are not connected. And before we look at ASEAN, we could say, why are half of the people not connected? Because it's the same reasons that will apply to our ASEAN unconnected. The first reason is, what is in it for me? I mean, why do I want to be connected? If the incentive is not there, let me just, it's sort of what's in it for me. If there's a lack of incentive, people don't see the benefit. If the farmers see the benefit that if he is connected and use a mobile phone, he can get better prices for his produce, then he will go online. If he doesn't see the benefit, he wouldn't do it. And this holds true across every segment of society. The other thing that stops people from going online is how much can I afford it? And this was a problem in Myanmar substantially because 3 years ago to get a SIM card could cost you $2,000. Today it's costing $1.50. So a lot more people just go to get a SIM card, they're going to experiment and see if they like it. So affordability is a very important consideration. And the third reason is that I don't know how to do it. I can't do it. And these could come from many factors. One is I'm illiterate. I can't read or write. And this is a problem still in some of our economies in ASEAN. People can't read or write. The second one is language literacy. Because as Rita said, content is king. But there is so little content going around. Most of the content is, people go on Facebook and Twitter. But it requires English language. If you only know Khmer, even if you can read or write, you won't find much content, and therefore you may not see the utility of going online. Then there is the culture issue. Sometimes if you are a woman in the rural area, you feel that there's cultural pressure for you not to go online. Because before I go to the fourth one, I would just mention that most of the people who are not connected are rural, they're low income, they're illiterate, and they're women, and they're elderly. I'm one of the few exceptions. And the fourth reason is what we have been talking about, is the absence of appropriate infrastructure. This is not just about the fast, Wi-Fi or broadband connection. It's just not about mobile coverage. In fact, according to Ericsson, 85% of the world is already covered by 2G. Myanmar is one of the few exceptions. And between moving from 2G connectivity signal to 2.5 which is GPRS, and 2.75, which is H, is not that big a deal. So, but there is also the lack of the related infrastructure like roadways, whether people can deliver things to you even if you buy anything, but it's also the absence of the lack of access to grid electricity. In ASEAN today, 146 people out of 600 people do not have access to grid electricity. And electricity was invented 100 years ago, and we still have more than 2/5 of our people in ASEAN that do not have access to grid electricity. But I'd like to come back on this because I like to, come back with a more optimistic assessment. This is a factual assessment on the infrastructure, but perhaps my colleagues would like to comment on what I have just said.
Yeah, I was very amused. I was very amused when Rita told me, right? There are some people in Myanmar that charges their cell phone
on a car
from
battery.
a car battery.
Yeah.
I mean, such great ideas, right? Now, I want to say I'm like Barbara, very bullish. Because today, when Myanmar gets onto this mobile network, you skip the 2G investments. You are able to leapfrog many of the economies in the world because some of the countries are still living in the legacy of 2G, and they find it expensive that if I have 2G, why should I invest in 3G and 4G? So now Myanmar is entering at 3G, for example, and from there, it's going to go upwards, right? And the other example is the fact that, today there are many applications around the world that exist on the mobile phones today that can help farmers, for example. Whether it's through trading, whether it's through environment, whether it's through just monitoring the growth of the crops. So once we're able to get these applications to the hands of the right people, it will actually help the rural economy grow. So one of the things I think we need to do is that, are we able to get the Myanmarese citizens and entrepreneurs in touch with what's happening in the rest of the world, and from there, jumpstart, instead of having to reinvent the wheel. And because of the app economy, it is very easy to do it, because everything's online. Just go and search or, make some connections, you're there. So I would say, boldly, right, by next year, Myanmar will jump many places, many places, just because now SIM cards are cheap, people have access to phones and apps.
And Mok, I mean, with this digital divide that we're talking about, this digital gap, being one ASEAN community, other ASEAN countries should basically help the other ASEAN nations that need help in terms of capital, infrastructure, to basically narrow that gap.
I would think that there's an ASEAN broadband plan, so not being in the government service, I will not comment, but yes, but what I would see is that today, many ASEAN countries, even in Ooredoo, Myanmar, you have a group of incubators with new ideas, right? Rita, for example, is starting a company, and there are new ideas. Cambodia has new ideas. I know True in Thailand has an incubation group that is linked to Silicon Valley. So is Indosat in Indonesia. So if we are able at these ASEAN summits to bring all these entrepreneurs and start up together, I'm sure we'll get many new ideas to help the rural population. After all, ASEAN as a whole is culturally so much similar than the West, for example.
Yeah, agreed. I was just going to say, there's lessons learned already. People coming online now, or new entrepreneurs that are building ventures now. There's a long history of lessons learned on what works and what doesn't work. There is no real reason to have to start from scratch or reinvent the wheel from the beginning. Building content that's relevant to specific markets is critical in bridging that digital divide. Giving people access to a SIM card for $1.50 does not get them online. That's why I was talking to my colleagues about off the stage, is that until the people of Myanmar have a reason to come online that is digital content that is relevant to them in their life, then buying a $1.50 SIM card means that they will use the phone. That doesn't actually mean they will get online. You see the same thing happening in Vietnam right now is when people are getting online. They're actually paying for 3G, but the 3G networks have been up for 10, 15 years. It used to be $2 pretty much, $4 maybe, unlimited all month. My 3G in Vietnam was blazing fast. Now, because there's so many more people that are paying into the networks, it's slowed down tremendously. But it's taken 6 years for people to get online because the content is finally getting to a place that's driving people to adopt 3G technologies.
So what is basically the typical behavior, Rita, of, let's say, the Vietnamese or the people from Myanmar with social media?
So social media is really interesting because it's actually the easiest of all the stories. If you think about what drives people online, and certainly what drives youth online, social networks are an easy play. They come online because they want to interact with each other, they want to be connected locally, they want to be connected globally. It allows for them to have a global voice. Where the countries vary slightly is in the types of technologies that they use. So if you look at the example of chat apps, There are certain chat apps that are very, very popular in Thailand. Line basically dominates Thailand. There's really no other player. And then in Vietnam, you have Zalo, which is a very local player. It's a Vietnamese company, and they pretty much own the market there. But social media is the easy play. It really is, meaning that people are going to come online, and they are going to go onto social networks, and they are going to share with each other, and they are going to talk with each other. It's the other content, and how does that content in social media break down into relevant conversation? So a farmer in the fields of Myanmar are not necessarily going to find value in Facebook, frankly. They'll come and they'll join Facebook, but that's not really what's going to drive them online. Until we can make an impact on their day-to-day life, we have an app, and Farmerline is a good example out of Ghana, where you're actually giving them a reason to come online, either from a financial perspective or for a professional, personal perspective. Those are the types of content plays that I would say are more important.
What about businesses in ASEAN? Are they already leveraging on the adoption of social media?
I would say yes. I mean, I think that every business that I've talked to in Myanmar, in frankly, in Vietnam, certainly, and in ASEAN, but in Myanmar, it's actually, companies here use Facebook more than they have their own websites. Many companies use Facebook as their landing pad. In online marketing, we call that your home base. And then all your outposts would be, like your home base is normally your own website that you control everything. And your outposts are Facebook, Twitter, all of the social networks. In Myanmar, many more of the companies are using Facebook as their home base than building their own websites, because they know the people are there and they don't need to spend the time and the energy to drive people to another location.
Let me give you an example, right? When you have an issue, let's say with the mobile network in Singapore, the first thing we do is to post it on Facebook.
Yeah.
Because the noise on the social media is even more than what is coming at the call center. So it's very important to us, post Facebook, Twitter, and so on. So that's the importance of social media for this part of the world.
So customer service rather than talking over the phone, everything is posted on social media.
Yeah.
Dun, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I was on a trip to Mandalay a few months ago with my colleagues down Su, and we met a lady from government officials, and she said we asked her if she used internet. She said no. Then we asked her if you use email. She said no. And she said I use Facebook and Gmail. So what I'm trying to say is people here, they leapfrog. The first mobile device they use is a smartphone, and they're using social media. They're using cloud applications without knowing they're using them. And if we ask them if they are using internet, they don't know this is internet. So this is the situation where we are leapfrogging from we are skipping black and white TVs to color TV. That's the scenario we have here. And I agree with Barbara. We have to talk about inclusive development. So we are promoting to the government that ICT, we don't see this as a separate industry or sector. This is centric to multi-sectorial development, inclusive development. We're talking about financial inclusiveness, financial inclusions. We're talking about connectivity. So we want to include people from the rural area. That's where we have most of our people development. So how can we help farmers with these technology? That's what we want to focus. So, we have been seeing some trishaw riders. We still have, using smartphones. And they're playing games. They could learn some languages while, they're waiting for customers. And if they on Facebook, why not they advertise services? These are possibility. And of course, one point to be careful is the localizations. You're right, we can go to app stores and download apps. They're very useful, but they are not in Myanmar language. So we need people like, Rita or entrepreneurs who can help us translate this into Myanmar contents so that they become more useful to the local users. Now, we are not talking about elite society where they are very good education. We're talking about majority. That's where the inclusive development is very important.
I think the language issue is something that will hinder the growth of digital economy in this region as a block, because every country is quite small, right? But I think there are tools today that allows us to cross boundaries. For example, there's a company in Singapore called Viki, V-I-K-I, that actually allows a platform to crowdsource, right? People coming in and then subtitling the movies that they're watching in their own language, whether it's in Tamil or whether it's in Tagalog or Myanmar's language. And from there, you find that your content can be seen by more people. So this is actually a crowdsourcing platform. And one of the things that digital connectedness allows us to do is to get people involved as a community to help other people in the communities. So I think these are the things that will be secondary effects of what we see from just providing connectivity to the citizens.
Barbara?
I was just going to say, having ended on a rather negative note, I like to look at the potential. You know, infrastructure in Myanmar is still a problem, but if I look at Africa, they have used the difficult infrastructure, no electricity, even if there's brown out, black out, to create so many innovations. So out of adversity has come innovation. And again, even we are ASEAN, it's a regional community. There's a whole global community out there that we can go and look and see what else has been invented. You know, if something works in Africa, in Kenya, Tanzania, I promise you it will work in Myanmar. And that's something we have not yet done. We focus on the ASEAN integration. I think the second thing which I would think is really a great potential for us all to look forward to is that the development of the internet, and maybe with the possible exception of Singapore, has been focused on the consumer market. We're talking about social media, we're talking about Facebook, we're talking about entertainment, games, you know, a bit of farmers finding out prices. But the real growth will come when companies, businesses here, will use the enterprise internet, when they use enterprise cloud, when we start looking at the Internet of Things, when we have the capacity to do big data, that is when we will see leaps and bounds in the productivity of our labor force and our business. And that is when we're going to see the real digital leapfrogging, because this will have an impact on all sectors, not just manufacturing and commerce, but in finance, in banking, in healthcare, in education. And I wouldn't look at it as a deficit or a weakness right now, but rather the potential that has yet to come and is ours, is within the power of ASEAN countries to take that opportunity and really go forward. So this is my optimistic scenario.
So there's tremendous potential, there's a
Huge.
lot of upside, especially if you tap the excluded.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to add on to this, Barbara's observation of big data. Let me tell you, as a telco, right, with this device, everywhere you go, you are tracked by 6 base stations, of course, if you are in the vicinity. So within up to 100 or 200 meters, I know where you are, right? If you launch an app, I know which app you launch.
Wow.
I know whether you're on Spotify, KKBox, YouTube, or whatever, right? If you launch a Google Chrome or a Microsoft Explorer, and then from there you type a URL, I know your URL that you typed onto. Of course, it's, from a privacy standpoint, it's very dangerous, but the laws of the countries actually help protect the personal data protection. Now, I think the opportunity, once you have this data, for example, today I can go to a mall owner and tell you, within the period of 1 month, the people who are visiting your mall is from what demographics and roughly where they live, for example. So as a mall owner, you're able to say, okay, if I want to capture certain demographics, where should I place my advertisements, right? And I'm going to tell the mall owner, if you are a mall in this location, let's say in Naypyidaw, right, who is your competing mall? Because I can know which are the people that visits that mall over a certain period of time. So the power of big data is just beginning to be seen at the enterprise level. And once we have this, amounts of improvements in productivity, improvements in marketing efficiency at the enterprise level is tremendous.
Do we have any questions from our delegates on the floor? Yes, sir. The gentleman in white. So while the mic is being handed over to you, I just want to ask a question here to Mok. Mok, we'll eventually become, one ASEAN community. Are we likely to have standard rates across all ASEAN countries one of these days? With the standardized rates, will this bring down?
This is a very difficult country. I mean, a very difficult question because every different country has had a different economic growth, right? Today we have some bilateral agreements within Singapore and Malaysia, so if we roam each other's countries, it's about the same rate, right? So I think it will happen at a bilateral basis. I don't see it happening on a regional-wide basis for at least 5 to 10 years, because there are commercial considerations, there are GDP considerations, not so easy.
All right, we have a question. Yes, sir. Please rise.
Yes. You still want me to stand up?
Yes, please. Your name and where you're from?
Okay. My name is Minzo. I'm representing PMA, which is Professional Marketing Association, and I do also does an advisory job for Ooredoo Myanmar. So it's not too much on asking questions, but sharing what I think through. I think it was a very fruitful discussion which we have all made, and in terms of collaboration within this the government and the private sector, I think MCA, which is Myanmar Community Association, will have to play a very majority role, leadership role. Leadership role doesn't mean to control, criticize, but to bring them on board. Because forcing on both parties, I think the private sector has also done sort of things. We have done a lot of apps. We also have our roadmaps, platforms on how to encourage both to the publics, going to the new recruits who have never used the phones. For example, just picking up, nowadays you can, last 3 years, the cheapest phone is 80,000, now you can get lower than 20,000, including your SIM card as well. So what is good for being a better landscape for Myanmar, I would say that if the Computer Association can play a majority role to take a bridge between the state and the private and see what's a roadmap like and initiate it and bring, because there's a lot of things you need to know what private is also doing, as well as what government is guiding also. If you can combine and engage that, I think Myanmar, soon like next year visit, you will definitely see some changes. So I would like to ask your opinions as well on my views.
Kun, let's start off with you.
I'm also from Myanmar Computer Federation. So yeah, we are a civil society. We are non-profit. So we work with the government, ministries, leadership, and also the private sectors. So we collaborate. But again, the leadership has to come from government if you're talking about the e-government projects. So there are always invisible hand, demand and supply. If they're funding their projects, there'll be entrepreneurs who will be doing these businesses. What we need is a good master plan and also a structure to implement this and follow up actions. So I agree with you. Yeah, we have to collaborate civil society or non-profits and private sectors, which is very important. And furthermore, I think the gaps between the ASEAN countries are very noticeable. Singapore, for instance, number 3, we are being last 20s in the ranking. So the collaboration among the ASEAN members are also important. One thing could be best practices we could share across ASEAN members. For instance, e-government best practices, lesson learned in other countries could be shared among the members. That'd be a good thing we can do, yeah.
Barbara?
I have nothing to add to that, but I just thought one area of cooperation among ASEAN countries would be in the area of in the development of small medium enterprises, because let me go. In Italy, the small medium enterprises account for over 60% of GDP. Their contribution is over 60%. In Germany, in Mexico, is over 50%. I don't know about Singapore, but no country, and maybe Hong Kong, but no country in ASEAN has the SME that plays such a significant role as a contributor to the GDP. And I think that's one area that ASEAN governments could get together. And I know that every time I read about it, every government says that it has an SME development strategy. But I'm not, there's an ASEAN development strategy, but I don't see much collaboration in the context of a digital economy, digital region, and a global digital economy. In Myanmar, for example, there are over 600,000 enterprises and 270 registered small medium enterprises. About 99.4% of that are SMEs. So if we could, we had a session earlier about unleashing the power of many. If those SMEs, the potential contribution could be unleashed, that they adopt the internet, whether on Facebook to start with, and then later on the, using cloud computing, big data, which would be much cheaper, the mapping of services, and of course, my favorite topic is the Internet of Things, but which we won't go into it here. But
so what we need basically is an Alibaba for ASEAN.
No,
The
sorry.
SMEs can be under one platform.
Actually, no, because that's one possibility, but because what Alibaba does is very specific and is to China and is ideal, because China started as an industrial powerhouse. It has lots and lots of factories. And these factories needed to export. And that was China's economic model. And Alibaba contributed and empowered that particular model. But there must be other models, because not all the countries in ASEAN are at the same stage of economic growth. Some, have already gone far away. The one that is left behind, that is just starting, is a frontier economy, is Myanmar. But if you were to discuss the economic model, one would say, does Myanmar have to go exactly the path that China has taken? But again, that's not the topic of this
So what do you think is basically the fear of SMEs to go into the internet and sell their products? Because most of them now are still brick and mortar operations. What are some of their fears? What are some of their hesitations? That's why ASEAN SMEs are still hesitant.
So I was just going to say, it's incredibly difficult to monetize consumers, for one thing. Regionally, in Singapore being always a notable exception to the story, is we're just a market that has very high unbanked population. Like, there's just formal banking is very low across the region. Some are higher, Thailand's a little bit higher than Vietnam, as an example. Myanmar is non-existent. So using the Alibaba, story, I know you're talking about it sort of tongue-in-cheek. The one that I would say that Myanmar needs, or maybe ASEAN needs, is actually an M-Pesa, which is the payments company that is in Kenya and has spread throughout Africa. It allows for the disconnected and the non-smartphone users to be able to connect to the global economy.
40% of the GDP of Kenya goes through the M-Pesa
tied
system.
to M-Pesa. Yeah. M-Pesa has more agents than all the banks have branches in the country combined.
70%.
It is something that connects the local people, whether they are connected or not, with the global economy. And that is more important than having the ability to be able to buy and sell stuff. But I think that's one of the reasons in Asia why the brick and mortars aren't online yet. It's incredibly difficult to monetize.
Yeah, for Myanmar scenario situation, we have many challenges. For e-commerce, or more specifically M-commerce, to be successful, we need, if you're selling apps, music, that's all right. If you're selling physical items, you need
distribution.
Distribution channel, delivery system. With traffic jam and all the all the logistic problems will come in. So unless we use drone, one thing good about Myanmar is we have nothing, so we can leapfrog and use the latest technology. I was reading a paper by GSMA and Deloitte. They were correlating the mobile usage and GDP growth, the data usage and GDP growth, switching from 2G to 3G and GDP growth. That's very interesting. We should look at that. What happened to Myanmar will be, we will leapfrog. We get all these multiplication at once. So one thing good is we don't have proper payment system here yet. If you sell something online, how are you going to make payment? As a seller, I want to receive money before I deliver my goods. There's no payment system here yet. So one thing good is I've been talking about many negative issues, challenges. And let's move on to positive aspect. We have a clean sheet of paper. We can have a blueprint which is future-proof. And that's why we said we need a master plan to plan everything, learn from people's mistakes. We want to learn from ASEAN countries. We were told that Myanmar is like Vietnam 10 years ago, maybe 9 years, 8 years, never mind. But we don't want to take 10 years to reach where Vietnam is now. If possible, a year, 2 years, 3 years, we want to leapfrog straight away. That's the approach that we have to follow through.
Are you going to buy a bunch of drones to be the
What
delivery? Because that would be very
What
cool.
policy allows that?
Yeah, right? You're talking about
Barbara's reaction to what
leapfrogging.
Tun said, Barbara?
Yeah, actually to what perhaps you said.
To what I said, okay.
Is that, Thailand, I mean, Alibaba is a great platform. And, success is when you're worth $150 billion. I mean, there's no denying that. But Thailand, I believe, has invited Alibaba to co-create a platform for Thailand to sell the products. And it has a reasonable degree of success. So my point merely is that if you want to use an Alibaba platform, it would be easier to just invite Alibaba into your country and work with them. What if I could just share for 2 minutes, I'm a member of the UN SCAP Sustainable Business Network, and we've looked at the SMEs issue in ASEAN. And we thought, if we were to do it today, how would we help the SMEs into the global economy? To answer your question, this is not just to sell products, but also to connect in many sense. One is to find out who is prepared to invest in my company, who could be my partner inside Myanmar and outside Myanmar, who are the service providers that I need to work with to bring me up to a certain level, which development agencies have the development and the services to help me build up my capacity. These are the issues facing the SMEs today, and it's beyond I make garments, and I want to sell my garments because in fact most of people here make garments, and garments has a very established supply chain. But they want to distribute products here, and they may even say, I'm of a certain size, I want to go multinational. If some of you may recall seeing the HSBC advertisement at the airport, it says even the smallest companies can become multinational. And I think that's what I've been working on, is to enable SMEs in ASEAN to become multinational. We launched last week, supported by UNFCCI, UN SCAP, UNIDO, and a few other institutions, and also by the Ministry of Industry, a platform called Myanmar SME Link, which aims to do precisely that, so that it empowers the SMEs not only to be a passive recipient of people searching for them, but SMEs in this case would also search within the platform of international companies that have an interest in Myanmar. So I think I'm not saying that this is the solution, but is the sort of the digital leapfrogging that we should all be thinking of for all countries in ASEAN, not just Myanmar. But when I presented this to UNFCCI some time ago, and I said that we want this to be an ASEAN project, that every country we have such, Cambodia SME link, Thailand SME link, but we want Myanmar to lead the way. And that was an extraordinary statement that I made to them. And I don't know how many people here sitting here from Myanmar and from UMFCCI, because the feeling is that Myanmar has to be the follower and the least. But we're saying, let Myanmar lead the way.
Indeed, a positive initiative. We have a question from the floor. Yes, sir. Mike, please.
Thank you. My name is Amil from Myanmar Computer Federation, and also I represent UMSCCI. I have one question and some, information to sharing. Number one is, yes, right now we are our e-government ranking is very, low, 175. But we have a very good time in past, 10 years back. That is because of the high-level commitment at the time, and we have one law, that is the computer science development law at the time. So according with this law, we can create the platform to dialogue between the private sector and the government sector, and also we cooperate each other at the time. That we can call the golden time for our computer industry. Then again, right now, we are pursuing our government, and now we are planning to adopt a new law, that is the ICT law. So we are planning to put in the e-government is one of the chapter, e-governments and the security and ICT development in that new ICT law. That is information that I want to share. Again, yes, when you look at the e-government, the high-level commitment is very important. And e-government, yes, we can get a lot of benefit, especially the good governance, clean government. Then also the e-government is one of the major driving force to for the industry. But again, I just want to ask one question to the panelists, whether we should raise or we should ask our ASEAN leader, because you see, we all believe that the e-government is very important. Again, when you implement the e-government, and the budget is also very important. Without the money, you cannot get anything. So money is any. So whether we should, the raise ASEAN leader to put one of the, certain percentage of the country budget to use in ICT and e-government. That is my question.
Who would like to answer that? Tun, let's start off with you.
We are colleagues, so I think I'll pass the question to you first, and I'll take last.
No, I think it's the common services that the government provides to run the country, right? Just as they build the roads, they help build public housing or subsidize public housing. It is important there has to be a common services to engage the citizens once they're online. So the answer is, of course, yes. Now, otherwise, where would you get that funding to build this common services layer? And otherwise, then how do people actually interact with the government? So I think, ask for money.
There are two models to it. We are talking about PPP, private-public partnership, and also talking about funding from the government or the official development assistance from World Bank, ADB. So there are many possibilities. I think the thing with the PPP is that private sectors has the sustainability. When it comes to businesses, sustainability is everything. Whereas for long term, I think PPP may work for some of the categories, or for some we need funding from the government or even international assistance.
Barbara?
I agree that the e-government is the delivery of government services, which is already being done. But if you look at the ranking where we started this discussion, Singapore is number 3, Korea is number 1, Singapore is number 3, Japan is number 6, Australia is number 2. These are countries in the Asia-Pacific region. And I understand that Japan and Korea are, investors and also substantial donors to Myanmar, and perhaps this is the kind of project that the government could ask for financial support just to jumpstart the process. That's just a suggestion and a possibility.
Should it be priority of governments in ASEAN?
It should be, you see, Myanmar has the advantage because it has no legacy system. So it doesn't have to deal with all the legacy issues of many entrenched interests, but it should be the priority of all governments, yes. But Myanmar, in fact, you can see that it's at the lowest level, but it also has the biggest opportunity because of the absence of legacy issues and too many entrenched interests. But Rico, I just thought, I just like to shift the gear a little because I know we're coming to an end.
To an end, yes, we have about 2 minutes left.
I just want to end for myself with a quote from Mark Zuckerberg. He says that access to the internet is a human right. Now, when I heard this, I thought, wow, this is crazy. But having pondered on it, reflected on it, I just thought, I think he's right. So with this last few minutes, I just thought whether anybody else agrees with me or what people think.
So do you think it's a human right? Mok?
I think today, for us in Singapore, I can't imagine not being connected, right? So I'll say yes.
Rita?
I think access to the internet is, it levels the playing field, like what I mentioned earlier, and it allows access to services, knowledge, information that you wouldn't otherwise get in a farm in Myanmar or in Vietnam or in Thailand. So I think that is extremely important for the development and human development of any society.
My answer is yes too. Having no access to internet is like having no access to education, healthcare, knowledge, financing as well. So that's why I think Facebook has been trying to promote, Mark has been trying to promote, internet as a human right.
The next billion.
We support that. Yeah.
And maybe a parting shot from our panelists, maybe a soundbite on ASEAN digital landscape.
Bring in the excluded as much as possible because it is the right of everyone. Well, we can't take care of the world yet, but let's take care of our friends and compatriots in the ASEAN countries.
As you open a country and be connected to the rest of the world, beware that the big boys like Google, Microsoft, Facebook don't come and destroy values of the small companies in Myanmar.
Rita, technopreneur.
I was going to say ASEAN-wide, this is one of the largest groups of consumers coming online at any given time, and it makes it a very interesting place to be a digital player.
Well, ASEAN members, we have gaps, diversity, but we also have common challenges. Maybe you faced 5-10 years ago what we are facing now. So if we share the knowledge among members, that'd be great. I think we should leverage on millennial group generation who became the adulthoods in year 2000. So if we leverage on these youth and combine with innovation, I think we can catch up with our friends in ASEAN.
And on that note, let's give a big round of applause to our panelists for the ASEAN Digital Landscape Breakout Session. Tun, Rita, Mok, and Barbara. Thank you very much. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you very much. I hope you learned as much as I did from this topic.